He should have driven past the highway crash like everyone else. He should have listened when people warned the smoking SUV might explode. But through the shattered glass, Shadow heard a child's cry. Jack ran toward the wreck, cut the power, broke through the twisted door, and pulled a terrified 10-year-old girl from the vehicle seconds before it became a deadly fireball. He saved a life that would soon expose a secret powerful people wanted buried forever. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe and stay until the end. What happens next will expose everything they tried to hide. The late autumn afternoon was quiet beneath a pale grey sky, with cold wind moving through the empty roads outside the city. Jack Morgan had learned that silence could be heavier than gunfire. At 38 years old, Jack was no longer the man who once moved through enemy territory without hesitation, carrying the weight of missions that most people would never know existed. During his years as a Navy SEAL, he had faced explosions, ambushes, and moments where a single decision separated life from death. He had earned respect from his teammates, not because he was fearless, but because he could remain calm when everyone else was breaking apart. But after leaving the military, Jack discovered that surviving the battlefield did not mean escaping it. The memories followed him home. The faces of fallen teammates, the nights spent staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The constant feeling that danger was hiding somewhere just beyond the corner. The world expected him to move on, but some wounds were invisible and refused to close. So Jack chose a quieter life. He moved to a small house on the edge of the city, far away from crowds and noise. He repaired old equipment, helped veterans who struggled after returning home, and spent most of his days with the one companion who had been beside him through everything. Shadow. Shadow was a 7-year-old black and tan German Shepherd K9 with intelligent amber eyes, a powerful body still carrying the strength of his working years, and several small scars hidden beneath his thick fur. One scar crossed the bridge of his nose, another rested near his left shoulder, reminders of missions where he had protected Jack before protecting himself. To strangers, Shadow looked like a retired military dog who had finally earned a peaceful life. To Jack, he was family. Shadow had followed him through deserts, forests, and dangerous operations where the odds of returning home were never guaranteed. He was not just a trained animal. He was the partner who understood Jack without words. But age was slowly catching up. Shadow was no longer the unstoppable K9 who could run for miles without slowing down. His steps had become slightly heavier. His recovery after long walks took more time. Some mornings, Jack noticed Shadow standing quietly by the window, looking outside with the same focused eyes he had carried on missions, as if a part of him was still waiting for the next command. That was why Jack had spent the afternoon at the veterinary clinic. The veterinarian had told him Shadow was healthy for his age, but Jack could hear the unspoken truth behind those words. They were both getting older. "You saved enough lives for 10 dogs, old friend," Jack whispered while driving home, one hand resting near Shadow's seat in the back. "You don't have to prove anything anymore." Shadow lifted his head at the sound of Jack's voice. The dog looked toward him through the rearview mirror, ears slightly raised, as if he disagreed. Jack gave a small smile. That was always Shadow's answer. Even after everything, even after years of danger, Shadow still believed his purpose was protecting someone. The road ahead stretched beneath the fading sunlight. Cars moved steadily along the highway, people rushing home to their families, unaware that within minutes, an ordinary afternoon would become the moment that changed several lives forever. Jack first noticed something was wrong because of Shadow. The dog suddenly became alert. His body stiffened. His ears pointed forward. Jack immediately slowed the vehicle. Years in the military had trained him to trust instincts before explanations. Shadow had never reacted without a reason. Then came the sound. A violent crash echoed across the highway. A black SUV lost control at high speed, swerved across several lanes, slammed into the metal barrier, and flipped down the slope beside the road. The impact sent broken pieces of glass and metal scattering across the pavement. For a moment, everything stopped. Then people started screaming. Cars pulled over. Drivers stepped out. Several people grabbed their phones, recording the scene instead of moving closer. Smoke poured from the damaged vehicle. The SUV rested at an angle, its front crushed, one side buried against the ground. The doors were twisted from the impact, making escape almost impossible. Jack was already moving before he even realized it. He pulled his vehicle to the side of the road and jumped out. "Stay here," he told Shadow. But Shadow did not listen. The German shepherd stood at the end of his leash, staring directly at the wreckage. His breathing changed. His entire body carried the same focus Jack had seen countless times during missions. Then Shadow pulled forward, not aggressively, not out of fear, with certainty. Jack looked toward the vehicle again. At first he saw only smoke and broken metal. Then he heard it, a sound almost hidden beneath the shouting crowd, a child crying. His expression changed instantly. "There's someone inside." A man nearby shook his head nervously. "Don't go near it. The car could explode." Another person added, "The firefighters are coming. Just wait." Jack looked at them. Then he looked back at the SUV. Waiting had never been easy for him. But sometimes waiting was necessary. Not today. Because somewhere inside that wreckage was a child who did not have time. Jack moved closer. The smell of leaking fuel filled the air. Smoke burned his eyes. The damaged vehicle made occasional cracking sounds as the metal continued to bend under its own weight. He saw her, a little girl, around 10 years old. She was trapped in the back seat, wearing a pink jacket covered in dust and small cuts. Her brown hair was messy from the crash, tears running down her frightened face. She looked small against the massive wreckage surrounding her. "Hey," Jack called through the broken window. The girl looked at him. "I can't move," she whispered. Jack's voice softened. "You're going to be okay. My name is Jack. I'm getting you out." The girl's eyes moved toward Shadow standing beside him. Is that your dog?" Jack glanced at his partner. "Yeah. His name is Shadow." The dog stepped forward slightly, watching her carefully. For the first time since the crash, the girl's breathing slowed. Jack knew that moment mattered. Fear made people freeze. Trust helped them survive. He quickly assessed the situation. The vehicle's electrical system was unstable. A damaged wire underneath the SUV was sparking dangerously close to leaking fuel. Jack immediately moved toward the front section, using the tools from his emergency kit to disconnect the power source. His hands moved with the precision of someone who had performed tasks under far worse conditions. But inside, something else was happening. A memory surfaced. Years ago, he had watched a teammate hesitate for just a second too long during a rescue. That hesitation had cost a life. Jack had carried that moment ever since. He promised himself he would never again stand by while someone needed help, especially a child. After cutting the power, Jack returned to the rear door. The door was completely jammed. He pulled once. Nothing. He pulled again. Still nothing. Shadow suddenly moved closer and began barking toward the lower side of the vehicle. Jack looked down. The dog had noticed a weak point. Good boy. Using the information Shadow gave him, Jack shifted his position and forced the damaged door open enough for him to reach inside. The girl grabbed his arm tightly. I'm scared. I know, Jack said quietly. But you're not alone. With careful movements, he pulled her free. The moment they cleared the vehicle, the SUV released a loud metallic crack behind them. People screamed. Jack carried the girl away, while Shadow stayed close, watching the burning wreckage. Seconds later, emergency responders arrived. Paramedics rushed toward them and took the girl onto a stretcher. One of them looked at Jack in disbelief. You got her out before we even arrived. Jack said nothing. He only looked at Shadow. The old K9 sat beside him, breathing heavily, but his eyes remained fixed on the rescued child. A short time later, the girl was placed into the ambulance. Before the doors closed, she reached out toward Shadow. Thank you, she whispered. Shadow simply watched her leave. Jack thought that was the end of it. Another rescue, another life saved, another moment that would eventually become a memory. But as he stood beside the highway, watching the ambulance disappear into the distance, he noticed something strange. A black sedan was parked far away from the crowd. A man in a dark suit stood beside it, watching the ambulance. Not the accident, not the rescuers, the girl. When Jack looked closer, the man immediately turned away and disappeared into the traffic. Jack's expression hardened. His instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive for years, suddenly warned him. Something about this crash was wrong. Very wrong. And somewhere in the city, someone who expected a 10-year-old girl to die had just discovered that she was still alive too. 3 days after the highway rescue, the city was still talking about the former soldier who ran into danger when everyone else stepped back. The video spread faster than anyone expected. A passenger recording from a nearby vehicle had captured the moment Jack Morgan carried the injured girl away from the burning SUV, while Shadow stayed beside him, alert and fearless. News stations replayed the footage again and again, calling him a hero who proved that courage was not something people simply talked about. It was something they did when it mattered most. But Jack never watched those reports. He never searched for his own name. He never cared about the attention. For him, the moment had ended when Lily was placed safely inside the ambulance. That was all that mattered. The rest of the world could call him whatever they wanted. Hero, soldier, brave man. Jack knew the truth. He had simply done what he believed anyone with a conscience should have done. On the morning after the rescue, Jack sat quietly on the back porch of his small house, drinking coffee while Shadow rested beside him. The old German shepherd lay with his head on Jack's boot, his amber eyes watching the empty yard. The peaceful moment felt familiar, almost normal. But Jack knew normal was something fragile. He had spent years in places where peace could disappear in seconds. And now, even after leaving that life behind, he could feel something approaching. His phone rang. The name displayed on the screen made his expression change slightly. Bright Shield Security Services. The company was where Jack had worked since leaving the military. It was not a glamorous job, but it allowed him to use his experience without returning to combat. He trained security teams, evaluated risks, and occasionally helped protect important locations. The man on the other end introduced himself as Daniel Whitmore, the company's operations director. Daniel was a tall man in his early 50s, with neatly combed grey hair, thin-framed glasses, and an expensive suit that always seemed perfectly pressed. Unlike Jack, who carried the quiet discipline of a soldier, Daniel built his career around appearances, reports, and avoiding anything that could damage the company's reputation. Jack had always respected professionalism. But he also noticed that Daniel valued paperwork more than people. "Jack, you need to come into the office immediately," Daniel said. His voice was controlled, but there was tension underneath. "Why?" "There are concerns regarding the incident on the highway." Jack looked toward Shadow. The dog lifted his head. "Concerns?" Jack asked. Daniel paused. "Just come in." When Jack arrived at Bright Shield's headquarters, he immediately noticed something unusual. People looked at him differently. Some employees smiled and congratulated him. Others avoided eye contact. The same man who had been praised online was now walking into a room where people seemed unsure whether they should admire him or stay away. Inside the conference room, Daniel sat across from him with several documents placed on the table. A woman from Human Resources sat beside him. She was a young professional named Karen Ellis, with shoulder-length blonde hair, a serious expression, and a calm personality shaped by years of handling workplace disputes. She was not cruel, but she had learned to follow company policy before personal feelings. Jack sat down. Daniel pushed a document toward him. "You are being temporarily suspended." Jack looked at the paper. "For what?" Daniel folded his hands. "Unauthorized intervention in an active danger zone, failure to follow emergency protocol, and destruction of private property." Jack stared at him. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Jack calmly asked, "You are suspending me because I saved a child?" Daniel's expression tightened. No one is questioning the outcome. The girl survived. Everyone is grateful for that. Then what is the problem? "The problem is how you handled it." Daniel leaned forward. "You entered an unstable vehicle without proper equipment. You interfered with a dangerous scene before emergency personnel arrived. If something had gone wrong, if you had been injured, if the vehicle had exploded, the company would have faced serious legal consequences." Jack listened silently. He had heard similar arguments before. Not on battlefields, in offices. People always talked about risk after the danger had passed. They analyzed numbers. They discussed liability. They created reports, but they were never the ones trapped inside a burning vehicle. "You wanted me to wait," Jack said quietly. Daniel did not answer. Jack continued. "You wanted me to stand there and watch a 10-year-old girl die because the paperwork was safer." Karen looked uncomfortable. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That is not what I said." "But that is what you mean." The room became silent. Jack looked down at the suspension notice. A strange sadness moved through him. Not anger. Sadness, because after everything he had seen, he had hoped the civilian world would be different. But once again, he was facing the same truth. Some people feared consequences more than they valued lives. Jack stood up. "I understand your decision." Daniel seemed surprised by how calm he was. "No argument?" Jack looked at him. "I have spent my life around people who knew the difference between protecting someone and protecting themselves." He placed the document back on the table. "I know which side I chose." Then he walked away. That evening, Jack returned home with Shadow waiting near the door. The dog immediately noticed something was wrong. Shadow watched Jack remove his jacket and place it on the chair. The old canine walked closer. Jack lowered himself beside him. "They don't understand, do they?" Shadow tilted his head. Jack gave a small smile. "You always did." But as the night became darker, Shadow suddenly changed. The dog stood near the television. A news report about the accident was playing. The video showed the SUV crash again. At first, Shadow simply watched. Then his body became rigid. His ears moved forward. A low growl escaped from his throat. Jack immediately turned. Shadow. The dog stepped closer to the screen. Jack had seen that reaction before. Many times. During missions, during searches, during moments when Shadow detected something humans could not. Jack grabbed the remote and replayed the footage. The same reaction happened again. But this time, Jack noticed something. Shadow was not reacting to the crash. He was reacting to someone in the background. A man standing near the road before emergency crews arrived. The footage was blurry. The man's face could barely be seen. But Shadow remembered him. Jack leaned closer. "Who are you?" The question stayed unanswered. Over the next 2 days, Jack watched every available video from the accident. Traffic cameras, phone recordings, news footage. He studied every second, every movement, every person. His military instincts slowly began connecting details. The SUV did not lose control randomly. The vehicle moved strangely before hitting the barrier. The driver appeared to fight against the steering wheel. The crash angle was wrong. It looked less like an accident, and more like something forced. Jack contacted an old military friend who worked as an independent vehicle technician. His name was Marcus Reed, a former army mechanic in his 40s with a broad build, shaved head, and rough hands covered by years of repairing machines. Marcus was direct, practical, and one of the few people Jack trusted completely because he cared more about truth than reputation. After examining the available information, Marcus delivered the answer Jack feared. The brakes were modified. Jack remained silent. Marcus looked at him seriously. This was not a mechanical failure. Someone wanted this vehicle to lose control. Jack looked at the photo of Lily taken after the rescue. A 10-year-old girl who should have been worrying about school, friends, and ordinary childhood problems, not someone trying to survive an attack. The realization settled heavily inside him. Lily had not been an unfortunate victim of a random accident. She had been chosen. Someone had planned this. Someone had expected her not to survive. Shadow quietly walked to Jack's side. Jack placed a hand on the dog's head. For years he had trusted Shadow's instincts in situations where his own eyes could not see the danger. And once again, Shadow had been right. The crash was only the beginning. The rain had stopped, but the city remained covered beneath a layer of cold mist, as if Holloway City itself was holding its breath while waiting for the truth behind the highway crash to emerge. Jack Morgan had spent the last several days following every possible lead he could find. The information Marcus Reed provided had confirmed his suspicion. The damaged SUV was not destroyed because of a random failure. Someone had carefully altered the braking system, turning an ordinary vehicle into a deadly weapon. But one question remained. Why? Why would someone target a 10-year-old girl? Jack sat inside his small home office, surrounded by printed documents, accident reports, and screenshots taken from different videos of the crash. Shadow rested beside him, his head lying on the floor, but his eyes still watching every movement Jack made. The old K9 had changed since the accident, not physically, emotionally. Shadow seemed more alert than before, as if saving Lily had awakened the part of him that had never truly retired. He was still the same loyal German shepherd, with black and tan fur, amber eyes, and scars from years of service. but Jack could feel something familiar returning. The old soldier inside the dog was awake again. Jack looked at the photo of Lily on his desk, a small girl with frightened eyes who had trusted him in the middle of a nightmare. He wondered what kind of person could look at a child and decide she was a target. Before he could continue his thoughts, someone knocked on his door. Jack immediately stood. Old habits never disappeared. His body reacted before his mind. He moved silently toward the entrance, checking the reflection in the window before opening the door. Outside stood a man surrounded by 2 security personnel. The man immediately caught Jack's attention. He was in his early 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who was used to controlling every room he entered. His dark hair was neatly styled, his sharp features showed signs of years spent under pressure, and his expensive black coat looked completely out of place beside Jack's quiet neighborhood. But what stood out most was his expression. He looked like a man who had everything in the world except peace. "I am Ethan Caldwell," the man said. Jack recognized the name immediately. Everyone in the city knew Ethan Caldwell. He was the founder and CEO of Caldwell International, a business empire controlling technology companies, construction groups, and investment firms across the country. Newspapers often described him as one of the most powerful businessmen in the region. But Jack noticed something the newspapers never showed: fear. Not for himself, for someone else. "My daughter is alive because of you," Ethan said quietly. Jack stepped aside slightly. "Come in." Ethan entered the house and looked around. There were no signs of luxury, no expensive decorations, no evidence that the man living here had once been one of the most skilled soldiers in the country. Just a simple home, a simple life, and Shadow watching him carefully from the corner. Ethan looked at the dog. "So this is Shadow?" Jack nodded. "He was there before anyone else." Ethan walked closer, but stopped when Shadow looked at him. The canine did not growl. He simply observed. Jack smiled faintly. "He decides who he trusts." Ethan gave a small nod. "I understand." For a moment, the powerful businessman who controlled thousands of employees looked strangely different. He looked like a father, not a billionaire, not a CEO, just a man who almost lost his child. "I want to repay you," Ethan said. Jack remained silent. "Whatever you need. Money, a house, a new job, anything." Jack looked at him. "No." The answer came so quickly that Ethan seemed surprised. "No. I didn't save your daughter for a reward." Ethan stared at him. Jack continued calmly. "I saved her because she needed help." The room became quiet. Ethan was a man who had spent decades negotiating. Every agreement, every partnership, every favor, everything in his world had value. Everything had a price. But Jack Morgan had just refused something most people would spend their entire lives chasing. "You are saying you want nothing?" Jack looked toward Shadow. "I already got what mattered." Ethan followed his eyes. The girl survived. That answer stayed with Ethan. Because he had met thousands of people during his career, people who smiled for cameras, people who acted generous when there was something to gain. But Jack was different. There was no calculation in his words, no hidden request, just conviction. Before leaving, Ethan stopped near the door. "There is something I should tell you." Jack looked at him. "My daughter has been asking about you." A small smile appeared on Ethan's face. Especially Shadow. A few hours later, Ethan returned with Lily. Jack immediately noticed how different she looked from the day of the accident. The fear was still there, hidden behind her eyes, but she was no longer the terrified child trapped inside a wrecked vehicle. She was just a 10-year-old girl again. Lily had long brown hair, bright, curious eyes, and a gentle personality that made people naturally want to protect her. She was quieter than most children her age, not because she lacked confidence, but because the accident had reminded her how quickly life could change. When she saw Shadow, her face immediately brightened. "Can I say hello?" Jack looked at the dog. Shadow slowly walked forward. Lily carefully reached out her hand. For a moment, everything was still. Then Shadow gently touched her hand with his nose. Lily smiled. "He remembers me?" Jack nodded. "Yes, he does." From that day, Lily began visiting more often. She talked to Shadow. She asked Jack questions about his time in the military. She wanted to know how Shadow learned so many commands and how they worked together. Jack avoided talking about the hardest parts. But Lily noticed something. Behind the quiet expression and disciplined posture was a man carrying old pain. One afternoon, while Shadow rested beside her, Lily asked softly, "Did Shadow save your life too?" Jack looked at the dog. The question brought back memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Years ago, during a mission overseas, Jack's closest friend, Michael Torres, had sacrificed himself to save the rest of the team. Jack survived. Michael did not, and even after leaving the military, Jack carried the belief that maybe he should have done something differently. That guilt changed him. It made him quieter, more distant. But Shadow stayed. The dog had been there during the darkest nights, when Jack felt like the battlefield followed him home. "He did," Jack finally answered. Lily smiled. "I think he knows when people need him." Jack looked at her, and for a moment he felt something he had not felt in years. Peace. But far away from Jack's quiet home, another man was receiving very different news. Inside a dark office overlooking the city, a figure stood beside the window while watching the same rescue footage that had spread across the internet. The man's name was Victor Hale. He was a powerful businessman with a cold reputation, a man who built his influence through manipulation rather than trust. In his late 40s, Victor had a sharp face, silver-streaked hair, and emotionless eyes that made people uncomfortable. He was known for appearing calm, even when making ruthless decisions. On the screen, he watched Jack carrying Lily away from the burning vehicle. His original plan had failed. The girl was supposed to disappear. The evidence was supposed to disappear with her. But one unexpected person had ruined everything. A former SEAL and an old military dog. Victor's expression hardened. "Find out everything about him," he ordered. The person standing behind him nodded. "Jack Morgan?" Victor looked again at the screen. "No." He pointed at Shadow. "Both of them." Because Victor Hale understood one thing. A man like Jack Morgan was dangerous, not because he had weapons, not because he had power, but because he still believed there were things worth protecting, and men who believed that were always the hardest to break. The night over Holloway City was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that made experienced people uneasy, because it often came before something terrible happened. Jack Morgan had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself. It waited, it watched, and when the moment was right, it moved. After discovering that Lily Caldwell had not been the victim of a random accident, Jack refused to ignore the warning signs. He had spent enough years in the military to understand that a failed operation did not mean the threat was gone. It usually meant the person behind it was preparing for the next move. With Shadow beside him, Jack continued investigating every piece of information connected to the SUV crash. The evidence slowly formed a clear picture. The damaged brakes, the altered vehicle system, the unknown man seen near the accident scene, the information leak that revealed Lily's location, all of it pointed toward one person: Victor Hale. Victor Hale was not just another businessman. He was Ethan Caldwell's biggest competitor. For years, Victor had built his own company empire by using aggressive strategies and questionable methods. He was a man in his late 40s, with silver-streaked dark hair, a sharp face, and cold grey eyes that rarely showed emotion. Unlike Ethan, who built his reputation through innovation and public success, Victor preferred operating behind closed doors, using pressure, manipulation, and fear to achieve his goals. People who worked for him often described him as intelligent but dangerous. He was not the type of man who lost control through anger. He was far more dangerous than that. He planned. He waited. And he calculated every weakness. Jack discovered that Victor had spent years trying to surpass Ethan Caldwell. He had attempted business attacks, legal pressure, and financial strategies, but Ethan always managed to survive. So Victor chose a different path. He stopped attacking Ethan's empire. He attacked the one person Ethan could not replace: his daughter. When Jack shared the information with Ethan, the businessman remained silent for a long time. They were sitting inside Ethan's private office, a large room overlooking the city. The walls were covered with awards and photographs representing decades of success. But that night, Ethan barely looked at any of them. All he could think about was Lily. "My daughter was never supposed to be part of this," Ethan said quietly. Jack watched him carefully. The billionaire who controlled thousands of employees suddenly looked like any other father afraid of losing his child. "People like Victor don't see families," Jack replied. "They see weaknesses." Ethan looked at him. "And now?" Jack's expression hardened. "Now he sees us." For the first time in years, Ethan realized something important. Power did not always come from money. Sometimes it came from people willing to stand when everyone else stepped away. Jack did not have an army. He did not have a corporation. But he had experience. And he had Shadow. The following days were spent preparing. Jack increased security around Lily without making her feel like she was trapped. He knew children needed protection, but they also needed normal moments. He refused to let fear control her life. Shadow became Lily's constant companion. The old German shepherd seemed to understand that the girl needed him. Whenever Lily felt nervous, Shadow would quietly sit beside her. One afternoon, Lily rested her hand on Shadow's fur and smiled. "You always know when someone is scared." Jack looked at the dog. "He's always been good at that." Lily looked toward Jack. "Because he protects people?" Jack nodded. "Because he cares about them." The answer stayed with her. But while Jack prepared to protect Lily, Victor Hale was preparing his final move. Victor had grown impatient. His first plan failed. His second attempt to hide the truth was collapsing. And now the man who ruined everything was standing in his way. Jack Morgan. Victor sat in a private meeting room with several men who worked for him. They were not ordinary employees. They were criminals hired for one purpose: to finish what Victor started. Among them was Adrian Cross, a former underground enforcer in his early 40s. Adrian was tall, muscular, with a shaved head and a scar running along his jaw. He had a reputation for intimidation, but unlike Victor, he lacked patience. He believed fear solved every problem. "Tonight," Victor said calmly, "the girl disappears." Adrian nodded. "And Morgan?" Victor looked through the window. "Morgan is the reason she is still alive." His voice remained cold. "Remove him." But Victor made one mistake. He underestimated the person he was trying to defeat. Jack Morgan was not just a former soldier. He was someone who had spent years learning how to protect people when the odds were against them. That night, as Lily and Ethan prepared to leave a private event, Jack noticed something unusual. A vehicle that had passed the entrance twice. A person standing too far away while pretending not to watch. A movement that did not belong. Jack immediately changed his posture. The relaxed man disappeared. The soldier returned. "Shadow." The canine immediately understood. The German shepherd lowered his body, focusing on the surroundings. Within seconds, Shadow detected something humans could not. A scent, a presence, a threat. Jack quietly moved Lily away from the main area. "What's happening?" Ethan asked. Jack kept his voice calm. "We leave now." The lights suddenly went out. People began shouting. In the darkness, several figures moved toward them. But Jack was ready. He did not panic. He did not attack blindly. He controlled the situation. Using the same tactical skills that had kept him alive overseas, Jack guided Lily and Ethan toward safety, while keeping the attackers away from them. Shadow moved through the darkness like he had done countless times before. The old canine found positions, alerted Jack to movement, and helped predict where the attackers would appear. They worked together like they had years ago, not as a soldier and a dog. As partners. The attackers expected an easy target. They expected a businessman and a child. They did not expect a trained SEAL. And they definitely did not expect Shadow. Within minutes, the attack collapsed. The criminals were stopped and captured before they could reach Lily. Jack did not celebrate. He simply checked that Lily was safe. That was always his priority. Later that night, the evidence collected from the attackers revealed the connection to Victor Hale. Documents, messages, financial records. Everything led back to him. The final confrontation came when Victor was brought face to face with the proof of his actions. For the first time, the calm expression disappeared from his face. "You think this changes anything?" Victor said. Jack looked at him. "It changes everything." Victor had spent years believing power protected him, but power built on fear always collapsed when the truth appeared. The evidence was handed over to authorities. Victor Hale was arrested. His criminal network was exposed. The operation designed to destroy Ethan Caldwell had failed completely, and the man Victor never expected to defeat had become the reason everything fell apart. A former Navy SEAL, and an old K9. The morning after Victor Hale's arrest, Holloway City finally felt quiet again. For the first time in weeks, Jack Morgan woke up without checking every window, without analyzing every passing vehicle, and without wondering where the next threat would come from. The danger was over. Lily was safe. Victor Hale's network had collapsed after authorities uncovered the evidence connecting him to the failed attack. The investigation continued, but the immediate threat that had surrounded the Caldwell family was gone. And for Jack, that meant one thing. It was time to leave. That was what he had always done. Throughout his life, Jack had become an expert at walking away. After every mission, after every battle, After every person he saved, he moved on before anyone could ask him to stay. It was easier that way. People could not be lost if they were never allowed to become too close. That was the lesson Jack had learned after losing his closest friend, Michael Torres, during his final military operation. He survived, but a part of him had remained on that battlefield. Since then, Jack had convinced himself that his purpose was simple: protect, complete the mission, move on. No attachments, no promises, no goodbyes. So when Ethan Caldwell invited him to the Caldwell estate after everything ended, Jack already knew what he planned to say. The estate was far different from Jack's quiet home. The large property stood on a hill overlooking the city, surrounded by carefully maintained gardens and tall trees. It represented everything Ethan had built over decades: power, success, security. But as Jack walked through the entrance, he noticed something different. The house no longer felt like the home of a billionaire. It felt like the home of a family, because Lily was there. The 10-year-old girl who had once been trapped inside a destroyed vehicle was now running across the room with a smile. She was wearing a simple blue sweater, her long brown hair tied loosely behind her head. The fear that once filled her eyes had slowly disappeared. She was still a quiet child, but the confidence she had lost after the accident was returning. And the reason was standing beside Jack. Shadow. The 7-year-old German Shepherd, K9, sat calmly near him, watching Lily approach. Jack smiled slightly. "Looks like someone was waiting for you." Before he could say anything else, Lily ran forward. But she did not run to Jack. She ran to Shadow. The old K9 lowered himself as the girl wrapped her arms around his neck. For a moment, Jack simply watched. There was something powerful about that scene. A child who had experienced one of the most terrifying moments of her life was now hugging the same dog who had helped bring her back from that darkness. Lily looked up at Shadow, then turned toward Jack. Her voice was quiet, but her words carried more weight than Jack expected. "Uncle Jack," he looked at her, "you didn't just save me." Jack remained silent. Lily continued, "You made me believe there are still good people in the world." The words struck deeper than any battlefield memory. Jack had faced armed enemies. He had walked into places where people were trying to kill him. But somehow, hearing those simple words from a child affected him more. Because Lily was not thanking him for the rescue. She was thanking him for something bigger. For hope. Jack looked away for a moment. He did not want Lily to see the emotion in his eyes. Ethan watched quietly from across the room. The businessman understood something at that moment. Jack Morgan did not realize the impact he had on people. He saw himself as someone passing through. But to Lily, he was proof that kindness still existed. Later that afternoon, Ethan and Jack sat together in the study. Unlike their first meeting, there was no tension between them, no offer, no negotiation. Just two men having an honest conversation. "I want you to consider something," Ethan said. Jack already knew. "No." Ethan smiled slightly. "You haven't even heard it. I know you." For the first time, Ethan laughed softly. "You really don't make things easy." Jack remained quiet. Ethan placed a folder on the table. Inside were documents for a new project, a child protection program, a community rescue organization, a K9 training division designed to help locate missing children, assist emergency teams, and provide support for families during disasters. "I want you to lead it." Jack looked at the papers. You want a businessman running this? No. Ethan shook his head. I want someone who understands what it means when 1 second matters. Jack looked away. I am not that person anymore. Ethan studied him carefully. That is what you believe. Jack did not answer, because deep down, he knew Ethan was right. He had spent years believing leaving the battlefield meant losing his purpose. But maybe he had misunderstood. Maybe the mission had changed, not disappeared. I spent my whole life protecting people in places where nobody could see, Jack finally said. Ethan nodded. And now? Jack looked through the window. Outside, Lily was sitting on the grass with Shadow beside her. The old German shepherd rested peacefully while the girl talked to him like he understood every word. And maybe he did. Jack watched them. For years he believed Shadow deserved a peaceful retirement. But maybe Shadow was not finished either. Maybe neither of them were. Jack remembered all the moments when he thought his best days were behind him. The missions, the losses, the pain. But standing there, watching a child smile because she felt safe, he realized something. A soldier's purpose was never only about fighting. It was about protecting. The next morning, Jack gave Ethan his answer. He accepted. Not because of money. Not because of recognition. Because there were still people in the world who needed someone willing to step forward. And Jack Morgan knew how to do that. Months later, the first community rescue program officially opened. The facility was not built like a military base. It was designed to feel welcoming. There were training areas for K9 teams, classrooms for children, and support spaces for families going through difficult moments. Jack became the leader of the program. Shadow became its most famous member. Children who visited the center quickly fell in love with the old German shepherd. They called him something Jack never expected. The four-legged friend of miracles. Shadow was no longer remembered only as a military K9. He became a symbol of comfort, of courage, of hope. Jack continued training rescue teams and helping families, but his life was different now. He no longer measured his worth by battles won. He measured it by lives protected. One afternoon, Jack stood outside the facility while watching Shadow walk slowly beside a group of children. The old K9 moved a little slower than before, but his eyes remained bright. Jack smiled. He finally understood something he had spent years trying to discover. Sometimes God does not return a soldier to the battlefield. Sometimes he guides that soldier toward the people who need him most. And sometimes the greatest mission is not found in a war zone. It is found in a moment when someone needs a reason to believe again. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not come from the moments when we win a battle, but from the moments when we discover why we were given the strength to keep going. Jack Morgan thought his purpose ended when he left the battlefield. He believed the scars of the past would always define him. But God had a different plan. Through a little girl who needed saving and a loyal K9 who never stopped believing in him, Jack discovered that his mission was never truly over. Sometimes God does not send a soldier back into war. Sometimes he leads that soldier to the people who need protection, kindness, and hope the most. In our everyday lives, we may never know how powerful one small act of kindness can be. A helping hand, a few encouraging words, or a moment of courage can become a miracle in someone else's life. What feels like an ordinary decision today may be the blessing that changes another person's tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still matters. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what lesson you learned from Jack and Shadow's journey. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join us for more emotional stories about courage, hope, and the miracles that appear when we choose to do what is right. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, strength, protection, and endless hope. Thank you for watching until the end.